So I was lucky enough to be at the Champions League final on Saturday, and like most people, I was struck, but ultimately not entirely surprised by the manner in which Real Madrid managed to grind out yet another win in the all-important game. Nobody's managed to beat Real Madrid since 1983 in a European Cup final, and despite Dortmund's best efforts, they couldn't do it. Many people kind of put this down to some sort of myth or this kind of over-exaggerated sense of importance that Real Madrid just have something in their bones or something flowing through their veins that means that they've got this pedigree in the Champions League. But I kind of wanted to dig a little deeper into what was going on behind the scenes at the club, and more importantly, what's going on off the pitch that allows Real Madrid to continue reaching these Champions League finals, allows them to keep winning them, and ultimately outsmarting clubs with bigger budgets, bigger wage bills, and on paper, better squads. I think the first thing that's probably worth mentioning here is that despite Real Madrid always having this reputation of being the Galacticos and a club that spend a huge amount of money in the Champions League, that's not entirely true of this current iteration of the club. Yes, not so long ago, they had that star-studded squad of Ronaldo, Benzema, Gareth Bale, and shortly after that, they tried to kind of recapture that with kind of failed signings like Jovic and Eden Hazard. But over the course of the last 4 or 5 years, Real Madrid have taken a different approach in the transfer window, and it's meant that they've actually got more bang for their buck, especially when we compare them to the domestic rivals and the clubs that kind of compete with them in the Champions League. Transfermarkt have a pretty handy stat which they call purchase value, which is really just the total amount of transfer fees spent on all the players in the squad, and it gives basically an idea of how much each club spent on transfer fees for the entire team. Here we can see that Real Madrid are actually ninth in that table. They're behind not only the likes of Chelsea, Manchester City and PSG, as you would expect, Man United too, but they're also behind clubs like Tottenham, Liverpool, and quite surprisingly Newcastle. I think that goes some way to kind of really underlining the fact that yes, Real Madrid is a team full of star players, but they don't really go and spend over the odds in terms of when they sign these players. Now, of course, I understand that people will be in the comment section right now saying, yes, Real Madrid don't spend money on transfer fees, but they do compensate for that with huge wages. I understand that that's a very pertinent point this week after Kylian Mbappe joined the club for a reported €100 million sign-on fee. But actually, that's not entirely the case. Take a look at this graph here, which the numbers are from UEFA's own report, the European Club Finance and Investment Landscape report, which they bring out every year. You can see that Real Madrid are actually fourth in Europe when it comes to their actual wage bill. Now that, of course, is very high. It makes them also one of the biggest hitters in European football. But as we can see, they're behind Manchester City, they're behind PSG, and they're well behind Barcelona. And notably, their wage bill is actually very comparable to the likes of Liverpool, Bayern Munich, and Chelsea. Now, these figures are for the 22-23 season. They're the most up-to-date ones that UEFA have published so far, and I'm willing to admit and accept that Real Madrid may be further up the ranks following the likes of Mbappe joining the club and Jude Bellingham. But I think it's important to note here that at this point, Real Madrid were also competing for Champions League, so it's not as if they've suddenly just over-invested in wage bills and managed to finally just kind of swamp the Champions League with teams that they didn't spend a lot of money on, they did spend wages on. The fact of the matter is that Real Madrid don't spend a lot of money in the transfer window, and they have a very competitive wage bill as well. The final figure that I want to actually bring up as well when we kind of look at the economics of Real Madrid is their net spend in the transfer window. A moment ago I showed you how much money they spent on total transfer fees, but this figure actually takes into account how much money Real Madrid have made from player sales over the course of, in this case, the last 5 seasons. And as we can see, out of all the clubs in the world, their net spend is actually the 19th highest. Again, behind some notable English clubs here, for example, Nottingham Forest, Leeds United, West Ham, Aston Villa, obviously a lot of Saudi clubs in there too. But what's worth noting here is that the reason that Real Madrid's figure is so low is not because they haven't spent a lot of money, which they have in comparative terms, but because they've also made a lot of money from player sales. Over the course of the last 5 years, they made €422 million from selling players on. And, it's not hard to think of examples of that. Casemiro, Rafael Varane, Martin Odegaard at Arsenal, and so on and so forth. So this idea that Real Madrid are the same old Galacticos who spend money without much concern in the transfer window and buy star after star after star doesn't really stand up to scrutiny. Yes, they spend money in the transfer window, but they do it carefully and they do go out and scout the right players, and I'll mention that in a moment. But most importantly here, they do make a lot of money back from the players who've either outstayed their welcome and have had to move on because they're not getting first team football, or players that simply haven't lived up to the high standards that they set for the players that they sign. In each circumstance here, we see a club that very careful with the money they spend, but they're almost even more careful with the money they make back. And that's really important for how Real Madrid's business and their economics work. Another main reason why Real Madrid are able to kind of outplay their rivals in the transfer window and as a result on the pitch is because they have a very unique circumstance that allows them to bring in young players and spend probably more time than most of their rivals in giving them the time and attention they need to develop into top-class players. Two examples of that actually played in the Champions League final, which were Vinicius Jr. and Federico Valverde. I thought both had fantastic games, and both are good examples of players that needed some time to adapt to playing for Real Madrid as young players. Vinicius Jr. is a perfect example of this. He joined the club for 45 million euros, and it's very easy now to say, oh yeah, he was always going to become this Ballon d'Or contender and multi-Champions League winning player. But if we actually go back looking through his seasons at the club, especially in La Liga, we can see that in his first 3 seasons, he struggled not immensely, but notably in terms of actually living up to that £45 million price tag. Also in his first season, he had 1 goal and 2 assists. Second season, 3 goals and 2 assists. And his third season, he had just 8 goals and assists, 35 appearances. As we can see, things eventually clicked for Vinicius Jr. and he has now become the player that we all know and love. But that took time, and that took a lot of attention, and it took a lot of patience from Real Madrid. And they were only able to do that because of the unique situation that they now find themselves in. Federico Valverde is a little different because he's obviously a central midfielder, so his stats aren't as notable. But as we can also see here, he started off as a kind of substitute player, getting lots of appearances, but not a huge amount of game time, but has slowly but surely creeped into prominence for Real Madrid, having joined the club at a very young age. And is another example of a player who, had he joined another club of equal size, perhaps wouldn't have been given that 2 or 3 season period to adapt to Spanish football and grow into the player that Real Madrid knew he could become. Obviously, we can't talk about the manner in which Real Madrid take their time with these players in domestic competitions without talking about Barcelona. There's no denying that Real Madrid benefit from the fact that the Catalan side have completely imploded in recent memory and are by no means the same heavy hitters that they once were in the Champions League. Of course, Xavi did win La Liga with them not that long ago, but he did so having to play this extremely defensive, pragmatic football, and even that didn't last particularly long. If you compare the two squads, you've got a Real Madrid team that are full of young, exciting players, and you've got a Barcelona team full of tired, older players. And there's no real solution in sight there for the Camp Nou side in terms of how they're going to be able to compete with Real Madrid long term. In a sense, Real Madrid are a little different from the likes of Bayern Munich, Juventus, and of course the bigger clubs in England in the sense that they are heads and shoulders above their domestic rivals, and that means they do have the ability to take their time and develop these young players when they join the club, as opposed to maybe 10 or 15 years ago where every single game mattered, every single derby mattered, and the club simply weren't capable of dropping points from one week to the next because they were blooding in young players. And of course, we can't talk about Real Madrid without mentioning Carlo Ancelotti here. Unlike Pep Guardiola, Thomas Tuchel, Xavi, whoever you want to mention, these top-class head coaches, Ancelotti has a particular ability to developing top-class players, but also keeping them happy in a squad full of other star-studded players. I thought it was quite notable that after the Champions League, he was asked about his tactics in the press conference, and he basically said that he wanted to make some tactical changes to adapt to how Dortmund were playing the game, and instead of telling his players what to do, he simply suggested, and they listened, and they made those changes on the pitch, and that allowed Real Madrid to go in and dominate the game. But there's no doubt that someone like Vinicius Jr., Valverde, and perhaps even Jude Bellingham, and maybe perhaps Kylian Mbappe to come next season, have all benefited from having someone like Ancelotti at the club who gives them the time to develop into the players that they have to be, as opposed to someone like Pep Guardiola who brings in players, he changes their style, he changes the way they play, and makes sure they have to fit into his style of football. One means that the club can be more open with the players they bring in, and they know they've got a head coach there who will get the best out of them, whereas other clubs that Real Madrid are competing with in the Champions League seem to be far more specific in the type of players that they want to sign and make sure that, maybe their scope is a little smaller than what Real Madrid go for each and every transfer window. Ultimately, Real Madrid are Real Madrid. They are the biggest club in the history of European football, and they will continue being exactly that. They're by no means a minnow. They're by no means a poor club. So, we have to kind of take all this with a pinch of salt. But I just think it's really important to note the manner in which the club have changed in the modern era to adapt to the financial dominance of the Premier League. Real Madrid don't spend the most money on transfer fees. They don't spend the most money on wages. But what they do really well is outthink a lot of these richer clubs in the transfer window. And as a result, they usually run rings around their domestic rivals and European rivals long before they've even stepped onto a pitch to play them in a game of football.